Alrighty, welcome to the episodic roast of Resident Outlast 7 Isolation Biohazard. I'm sorry, I meant to say Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which is kind of a redundant name if you ask me, but we're going to get right into this roast. A lot of us don't like this game so far, especially after what we just witnessed, but we're going to get right into introduction, so you all know me as Biodevil Dom. Up next, we have our main host, Mr. Renegade Operative.
If you want some NyQuil, play this fucking game because there's nothing interesting about it.
After that, we have our other co-host, Mr. Captain Chaos.
What's going on, guys?
And last but not least, we have Mr. Daybreaker Rain. Today, we got a really short cast today. Let's go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's going on, guys? I just have one question. When does RE7 become Resident Evil or anything pertaining to it? Because what we watched fucking didn't feel like it at all. So,
yeah.
Is that going to be a DLC season pass expansion? It's the real Resident Evil experience?
No, but you know what? We could probably talk a little bit about DLC as a diverging question.
Now with third-person camera.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be hilarious.
That would be awful. And still wouldn't make me buy that fucking Snorefest. But
pay us $4.99 to put zombies in the game.
right. Have Freon advertise it. He'll be like, Capcom DLC package, $5.99.
Jill Valentine might make a cameo.
Right. Well, they actually have a particular character from the ending that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Let's get right into this document. What were your initial thoughts on Resident Evil 7's reveal? Let me just go straight up and say, like, and I think we recorded this too, by the way, for E3. I was just fucking confused. I thought that was Outlast, or I thought it was Until Dawn, the VR game, because I think they didn't announce it at that point or didn't show any gameplay at that point. And I just didn't know what it was. And then Resident Evil came up, and I'm like, okay, so is this Resident Evil VR? Because at that point, you know, if it was just a spin-off Resident Evil game, fine, whatever. It's dedicated for VR. Capcom just wants to see if the hardware is even worth developing for. That's fine. But no, it's a mainline title. And I was extremely upset with this. And a lot of people initially told me, no, you're wrong for not liking this new change. You're wrong for not even wanting to give it a chance. Because I said since day one that this game was basically, just trend following, and it was not the right direction for Resident Evil. And after seeing a lot of the gameplay and actually experiencing it myself at Capcom, it's not Resident Evil. So who wants to go next?
I guess I can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I said this in the chat, but I think REVR would have made a lot more sense because it wouldn't have had that connotation of being in the mainline franchise as the next iteration of Resident Evil. I think a lot of people were expecting RE7 to be an actual, like, legit and solid follow-up to RE6 and rectify all the problems that game had. And when I first saw it, I was like weirded out because it was in the whole, they had the plantation, the environment, the setting, but it didn't feel like Resident Evil to me. It felt like totally something else, like Dom said. So that's when they started to talk about the details, like days later, about the VR and all this other stuff, about how the characters aren't going to be back in the sense of just like being in the game, but they have some new characters and they're going back to roots. So that just was a red flag to me because every time Capcom says they're going back to roots, they always fuck it up every single time. Like, I remember they said the same for RE6, and then they just turned around and said, you know what? The horror in this game is just Chris Redfield having post-traumatic stress disorder. That's it. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, because it makes no sense. So go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off here, but like just kind of bringing up a earlier point you made too, like don't you think it would have made more sense, like despite 6 having a lot of plot holes, if they went in with 7 and explaining a lot of those to kind of rectify all the story problems with that game, like, because Chris never finds out who Carla is, neither does Leon, and wouldn't that have made sense to explain that at least in notes that, oh, they found out that it was actually Carla that was behind the attacks and not Ada?
Yeah,
I mean,
it'd be
hell,
funny. Yeah, go ahead.
They did it with Metal Gear Solid 4. I mean, hell, that filled in a lot of the gaps storyline wise, in terms of questions that hadn't been answered throughout the series. So I mean, it wouldn't have been, not necessarily a bad move to go that direction if they had.
I think a lot of people assumed that Resident Evil 6 was going to be the wrap-up game because Chris and Leon was going to be in the same game together, and that never happens. So because of this, a lot of people thought, oh, this might be the end of the franchise, but I think they do need that sort of game in the mainline timeline to sort of clear up all the conspiracies and problems from the last few Resident Evils that we don't know about story-wise. And instead of giving us that, they give us something completely new and different. I don't mind new things, but the way they're doing it and everything just sounds like an advertisement, a slogan, and Capcom never fulfills this. So this is the main problem I have with Resident Evil 7. It claims to be doing a lot of stuff right, going back to the originals. That's not necessarily a bad idea, but in execution, it's so boring from looking at the gameplay. And I know these are probably later questions, but that's how I feel about it initially, and that's how I feel about it after looking at so much gameplay. It doesn't really appeal to me.
Yeah. Like when I first heard about it, I was skeptical, but I don't like there are a lot of series that they go in new directions with their gameplay and plot and all that, and they turn out okay. So I was trying to be a little bit optimistic and say, well, maybe it won't be so bad, if it goes this new direction. I mean, yeah, it's first person. I mean, but in the beginning they said that it was just going to be the that was just going to be like the demo or something that was first person.
We're going to talk about the demo and
yeah, right. They changed they kind of changed that as their production went on with the game. And, as I started to see more about what the game was about and how the game played and what it looked like, I was a little bit more skeptical. Like, I wasn't, that they were going to say that the entire game is like this. The entire game is going to be in first person, which, okay, maybe, I was not as optimistic as I was before because, then I thought, well, then in that case, they're really just trying to follow the trend that's been going on with the first-person horror genre ever since Amnesia kind of made it, really popular. And, that's what Resident Evil 7 seemed to be doing. And then I had a chance to play the demo for myself, so I had, firsthand experience with just how bad the gameplay is and how really not even really bad, but just really boring. Most of the game, from what I had played, was really just item collection. There wasn't any zombies in the demo. It was just a BOW, and it's it was just boring. I didn't really have a lot of fun with it. You never really got a chance to even use a weapon, so it's just, and I mean, that really ended up being what the game was about in general. Like, it wasn't really, there wasn't much to it. The demo really showed most of what the game is even about, from what I've seen of the gameplay that has been leaked. So, initially I was a little bit optimistic, but now that I've seen more of it and now that I've played it for myself, I'm just, I'm not really, I'm not feeling where the series is going. It could have worked as a reboot or something. Or just another game, not even really Resident Evil, but it being a mainline Resident Evil game, not like a spin-off or anything like that, or just another game entirely, is, the main problem here. I mean, the game could be okay at best if it were just another game, but it's not. So
yeah, what's funny too is that I've had people message me and telling me that they think that 7 was originally supposed to be a reboot, but they saw how poorly DMC did, and they just didn't want to try that again. this is mostly because of some of like the plot problems. But I don't know. I believe we talk about the plot later in the doc, but there's some things with like the ending and just looking at who the producer is and just what games connect to 7 specifically. It's just a mess, and it doesn't seem like this really should have been a mainline sequel.
Yeah.
So, Daybreaker, you have anything to add on before we move on to question number 2?
I mean, I was kind of more or less in the same boat of that. I wanted to kind of give that sort of optimism to Capcom, that they could pull something off that kind of rejuvenated the series in a way. Like, so I wasn't like super on board with the idea of it being complete garbage, because it's like, you look at like Resident Evil Survivor and the limitations of like the PS1, and to reimagine that, like, hell, I probably would have even been okay with like a complete freaking overhaul of just Survivor. I think it would have been a good move in a way had they done it right. Like a first-person Resident Evil can be done right. I mean, if the on-rail shooters are any indication, like the Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles. So initially, I was just kind of on the fence line. I'm not like the biggest RE fan out there, but I really just felt like that this could be something if done right. But I think seeing as how the market is just completely oversaturated with this genre, it really brought nothing new to the table that hadn't already been established in the indies. Horror is like where it's at. Like, I mean, the freaking big YouTubers are, that's what they got famous off of, just screaming like a madman, for the camera and profiteering off of that. And so like everybody's like really jumping on the horror things. And so just watching the gameplay and just seeing these leaks, I can really say that like it just brought absolutely nothing new to the table that you can't get out of any other game that's already on the market.
Yeah, it's really a shame, because it's like, and not to mention like the YouTube promotion and whatnot. It's just really a game made to trend follow, and not really there to, actually improve on the series, improve on the faults that the series had with the last 3 games that we've had over the last several years, or even just bring something that maybe not necessarily improve on those particular 3 games, but improve on something that the classic 3 games failed to do, or something like that. And that's not what this game does. It just it plays it safe, and that's the best way that I could put that. But we're gonna get on to question number 2, and I'm gonna let Mr. Renegade read off number 2.
All right, so obviously the biggest change with Resident Evil 7 is that the first mainline Resident Evil title to use a first-person camera. How do you feel about this perspective change? Has it impacted the quality of the game overall? This goes back to what people said previously. You can make a good first-person horror game. There's no disputing that, because I think that horror, it can be done on any plateau. It just depends on how good you do it. So what RE is doing, on the other hand, is just the elements crafted within that game. It does not make that camera change any more innovative, because they were claiming that this was a big thing. This is the reason why we're doing it. This is why we're sticking to it, because it's so important for the series to progress to a new plateau. But if you claim this and you don't do anything original with it or innovative, and it's boring, then what's the point of changing the camera angle? That's what I think about that.
For me, it's, and I have to kind of agree with you too. It's like, what's the point of changing something if it's not actually going to really
innovate or do anything?
Innovate. Yeah, like this sort of change wouldn't have been so bad if it wasn't, if we didn't know how, like, assuming that Capcom was Capcom from the early 2000s and late 90s, If it was that Capcom, they'd probably do something great with it, or at least try to do something great with it. Whereas this game, it's just kind of playing it safe. It's just treading this fine line that it's not really trying to add in anything new that no other first-person horror game has ever done before. It's just kind of like, no, we're just slapping the Resident Evil title to it.
And the problem Capcom has is that they have this tendency to get ideas, throw them at the wall, and hope they stick. That's not really innovating anything at all. People give Resident Evil 4 a lot of shit, but at least that game brought something new to the table in terms of third-person shooters. It had a new camera angle that everyone copied. It was very successful. I don't think 7 is going to do that at all.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that too. It's like, you look at something like, Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 4, and I apologize if you hear a dog in the background. My dog is really annoying. Actually, I'll hold that thought.
Yeah,
right.
I guess I'll give my thoughts real quick. The first-person camera, like Dom said, it's not really... I don't really see why it was used other than, like we've mentioned before, because that is the current trend in the market for horror games. Is that's the only reason I see it being used or utilized. But and also the whole like found footage aspect of the game, which I really don't understand in the first place. But that really could have been completely taken out of the game, and nothing really would have changed. You could have just had a third person. And also, Capcom saying apparently to them first person is more immersive and therefore more scary, which I disagree with, because, you have had other Resident Evil games that have been scary without having been first person. So I don't really see the point of it, other than, that is the popular thing to do now.
Yeah, and to kind of play off that point, it's like, I don't feel first person is the only means of immersion. I mean, if you look at games like Silent Hill, for example, those games are super immersive, and they're not in first person, they're in third person. And even from my perspective, even games outside the horror genre, such as like Dark Souls, can be just as immersive in not a first person aspect. So I don't necessarily feel that the camera perspective was the most innovative thing that they could have done, and we've already kind of said it a couple times already. It's really following a trend, because like I said previously, the market, the indie market especially, is super oversaturated with the first person horror video games. I mean, you've got big titles like Outlast that's in first person. I mean, even the point and click nature of Five Nights at Freddy's is in first person, so it's like, this is really not breaking any ground that hasn't already been established or already hasn't been beaten to death.
Right. Sorry, I had to go tell my dog to be quiet, but so I do. I apologize for that. But I was saying, I think I was talking about Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 1 and how how they set the trends for certain games. So to kind of get back to that point, I was going to say that with 7, it's you look at 7 and this is not a trend setter. If it was something like, hey, we're going to make this game in first person, but we're going to do something that a lot of these first person games don't do, what a lot of these first person games fail to do, and they set a trend with that would be okay, but that's not the case. It's again, it's very playing it safe sort of Capcom strategy here, where it's just trend following. So and you were kind of getting into this too a little bit, Daybreaker and Chaos, where you guys were talking about like making a game that was not necessarily in first person but was immersive. I think that a perfect example of doing something right and actually kind of going back to something that's maybe not necessarily popular today, or maybe it is depending on how you look at it. Go back to a fixed camera angle style and just innovate that by bringing in things that you weren't able to do back on the PS1 era. I mean, you could look at something like Doom, where Doom 2016 brings in a lot of things from the older Dooms, but it also brings in new things as well, and it does it very well. And a lot of people like that game because it's a mix of old and new. And I think that what Capcom did with this game was just like, here it is. It's just Resident Evil. It has a few mechanics that you're familiar with. Therefore, it's a Resident Evil game, and I hope you like it. And that's not really what makes something immersive or good, in fact. But we'll get right into that later down the dock. So I'm going to let Chaos read off number 3.
Yeah, sure. Masachika Kawada, the Capcom dev that brought us games such as Resident Evil, Operation Raccoon City, and Umbrella Corps, is working on 7. Do you think he should have been allowed to develop the latest mainline installment? I guess I'll go ahead and answer that. No, because considering what I know of his track record, of him being behind Raccoon City and Umbrella Corps, two of the most hated games in the franchise. I don't know why he was put on to develop for 7. But according to what I've heard, that the way it works in Japan is if you know somebody, then you can easily just get in and be one of the top executives or producers of a game if you just have connections. And I feel like that might have been what happened.
He was working with Capcom like way back.
Yeah, he
in
was
the
like
90s,
a producer or something like that.
He's a producer now, and he's been a producer since I think the Chronicles, the rail shooter games or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, since RE4 on PS2 or something like that. But he's been a background designer for like most Capcom games. So he basically made,
that's
like,
what it was. Yeah,
he basically made backgrounds for like classic Resident Evil or Dino Crisis or anything you could really think of. That's what he did. So how he got to the position of producer is way beyond me, but it doesn't fit him.
The thing that makes no sense about that to me is like background designer is so far removed from anything having to do with, being at the top, and making decisions for like what goes into the story and what goes into the game in general. You're just designing the backgrounds. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just like a huge leap from doing that to being a producer or like the director or just, the main person behind, who makes the final decisions.
For me, I would have to agree with you, Chaos, here. Like, I don't think so. Especially given that we've played through Operation Raccoon City on the TCP, and we know how shit that game was, right? I mean,
fuck that game. That game can suck a wet fart out of a dead rhino's ass.
I think three of the 4 people that were in that playthrough are here for this discussion, this roast, and that game was ass. But partially due to the fact that you had someone like Keiji Inafune who kind of spearheaded that, and then also the whole westernization thing that Capcom had going for them because of Inafune. That game was ass. And then they did, then they had Masachika Kawada, who's also the producer for Umbrella Corps. He worked on that game. The difference between Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City is that one of them is canon. The other one is just a spin-off title, and that game is Umbrella Corps. Umbrella Corps doesn't even make sense as to why or how it's even canon, and especially after with, we saw the leaked ending, which I think this video is going up on the 24th, so we could talk about that anyway. The leaked ending, it's basically, oh, hey, you got an Umbrella Corps soldier from that game wearing that gear, takes off his helmet, who we're going to assume is Hunk, because apparently Hunk is in Umbrella Corps, and he calls himself Redfield. And, they fly away in a helicopter at the end of the game with the Umbrella Corps umbrella logo. And that's how, Umbrella Corps and 7 tie into each other. It just doesn't make sense. I thought this game, what Capcom was saying, they were like, no, this game takes place right after 6. There's going to be lots of references to previous Resident Evil titles, but the only one that seems to make a really big, appearance or actually have any sort of relevance is Umbrella Corps. And this is a guy who, makes these poor ass titles, and this is the third time that he's made a really bad Resident Evil title. I would not want to put any sort of faith on this guy if I was someone at Capcom who's, at a higher position than him. I would not want him to work on a Resident Evil title. I would just say, look, you like to make a lot of action games. Granted, they're really shit, but you like to make a lot of action games. Let's take a risk and make a completely new IP, completely action-based, and I'll let you do whatever the fuck you want with it. Because I need to get somebody who can actually make Resident Evil more of a game that, is up to quality, up to the standard that our consumers want it to be at, and you are not delivering at that.
Yeah. Anybody else have any opinions about that?
I don't have much to say about this, but I will say that Capcom hierarchy is weird because, you have Uno parading around, saying, oh, this is going to get released. This game's going to get released. And he just works on Street Fighter, but it sounds like he's a head guy there. Like he's the fucking head of PR. So it's so weird how they operate. I'm not really surprised by something like this, but I will say that having Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City on your track record is nothing to be happy about.
Yeah,
those
I have
games
a curious question before we move on to number 4. Do you think people like Kawada and Ono should be fired or at least demoted?
I would say keep them for their experience because, they are providing the company with something, even though their past iterations haven't been that great. You can demote them and keep them to those respective teams. So if people want to see more games that is like action-based Resident Evil, maybe Kawada will have some like intelligence about that, but and keep Uno as well for Street Fighter stuff, but don't make them like head guys if they clearly don't know what they're doing. I think those should be reserved for like special roles, like people who actually have an understanding for the series. They need to be the head guys because they know what the fuck they're doing. They know how things operate, and these guys just shill out garbage. So that's the reason why I think that they should be demoted.
So we're going to let Daybreaker read off number 4.
Alrighty. So it says here, Capcom has claimed that the game is a return to the series' roots. Yet with all the previews and information that's out there, it still seems that the game just takes from the other first-person horror games such as Outlast, Alien Isolation, and even the playable teaser from Silent Hills. What are your thoughts on Capcom's claim? And from the footage I've seen, it's not it's not really hard to make that as overall assumption that they really did just kind of look at what's popular in the first-person horror genre and really just kind of try to copy-paste that, but try to hide it under the guise of a quote-unquote Resident Evil, this like theme, which falls flat on even in that regard. So, I honestly don't feel that this is a return to the series' roots. Not at least from the gameplay that I've seen. I really don't see where that can even really be conveyed because like I mentioned earlier, like really the entire time watching the leaked gameplay was all I could think of is when is this game going to start representing Resident Evil? When is it going to become Resident Evil? When is it going to give me something that's even noteworthy, worthwhile? Like even just like, because you can look at like any other game series done right and you could add in like, even if they didn't want to have like a full-blown connection with the series as a whole, like with the storyline and everything like that, just little nods here and there to things like maybe like photos on the wall, or you see something that looks kind of oddly familiar, like you've seen it before, or a room looks similar to like one of the rooms from the Spencer Mansion or something like that. Just little Easter eggs, if you will, would have even kind of maybe helped that along, because really and truly with even there's just none of that there, and the game just doesn't look or feel like Resident Evil.
I think it's really incredibly ironic that they say they're going back to roots, and yet this game is probably the most far away game from anything relating to Resident Evil I've ever seen. Like, it doesn't incorporate, like Daybreaker said, anything from the Resident Evil games, like the zombies or any references to Resident Evil other than that ending. So really, it's like a completely different game. Not even really Resident Evil.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because a lot of people like to say that Silent Hills was supposed to be making a first-person horror shift. But if I recall correctly, Kojima was going to be pulling in from all of the Team Silent Hill games and using that as inspiration. So
not only that, he had Team Silent people on his staff at Kojima Productions.
Yeah, and I want to use that game as an example because for one, I don't think that game was going to be entirely first person because if I'm not mistaken, 4 had sections where it was first person, but it was also a third person game.
Yes.
But it's not to mention if it was entirely first person, you're talking about a development team and a producer that actually has a very good track record as opposed to a AAA developer who we know with like what they've produced and like just how overall the company's quality as far as releasing games has been over the last decade. It just hasn't been a good track record in comparison to one person, who has a much better track record. So it wouldn't, if PT Silent Hills wasn't first person, it would have actually set some trends, whereas 7 doesn't. 7, what it ends up doing is, Capcom claims it's returning to roots, but really all you see is just a return to horror. And this is something that I think the series has had a problem with after Code Veronica, is that one thing outshined another subgenre that Resident Evil was always known for, and that is survival. It seems like people forgot that Resident Evil is all about survival at its core, and horror just being more of the backdrop. Resident Evil was never scary to begin with, and I don't know why they were trying to go with this kind of route with 7. And not that it is scary to begin with anyway, but if they had went more for a game that was more about survival and resource management and whatnot, as opposed to, oh, hey, I see some bullets. Yeah, sure, I might only pick up 4, but a lot of these enemies can be killed in like 2 shots. It would have made a lot more sense. Like, in comparison, just look at something like the Resident Evil remake. You can go around killing every single enemy in each room. If you're doing real survival, however, you can do that, but you might be left with like 2 bullets, and there might be like a crimson head and 1 regular zombie in a room that you have to get to in order to get a puzzle done or a key. So, something ridiculous like that. But that's not what you get with something like Resident Evil 7. 7 is just like, oh, hey, there's a monster. It's coming out of some goo. Oh, hey, there's an old lady. She's screaming in your face. This is scary. This is scary. And it's really just more of jump scare, as opposed to really remembering what Resident Evil is about, and that is survival horror.
Resident Evil also had like slow building tension, whereas this game is just like, oh, hey, jump scare.
Right. At least with like something like Resident Evil, you kind of built up to a certain point where it's like, okay, well, there's a new enemy coming in. I've never really encountered this. Like, take again Remake for example. You're going through the mansion and you've never encountered a hunter before. Then you get back from the guest house, and all of a sudden you got a whole new enemy type that's nothing like anything in the mansion that you faced before prior to that point. And that can, for someone who might not have played Resident Evil before or even has any experience with survival horror games, they can find that as something that's very tense or maybe even scary. Whereas 7, it's just like, okay, I've seen this done in countless other indie horror games. This is nothing new.
Right.
So, Ren, do you have anything to add to this?
No, not really, other than the fact that, Capcom is the master of false name branding. And what that means is they tend to make a series that's completely, on track. It has a certain foundation of mechanics behind it. And then they try to shoehorn in some bullshit where it's something like DMC Devil May Cry, and they try to put their name brand on it to try to make that game sell. So them putting RE7 as a mainline title, because of this, I'm not surprised because of its mechanics. It can totally feel like not even a Resident Evil game, and you look at it and it's like, why did they put the name on here in first place if that's the case? But it's for money. So that's how I feel about it. I think that they just wanted this to sell somehow in some way, and it's very like just disrespectful to the previous entries of the series if you think about it, because it sort of tries to take the foundation of what made the series successful, which was horror, and they try to adopt it to what everyone else is doing. So it goes back to the whole trend following point. They were the trendsetters. They are the ones who coined survival horror. So for them to say, well, everyone's doing this fad over here, so I'm just going to try to tag along and wear what all these new kids are wearing and get in line, it's so stupid. It's hilarious. And I think what's happening is Capcom is just shilling out for money so they can be in the popular crowd. And it's not working out well for this game. A lot of people that are rational are saying it's boring. So that's what I think. And I never in my wildest years would I associate Resident Evil with boring, because they always had something going on, some tension, some character development. 7, on the other hand, it's just so disjointed with the way the tape recorder thing works, and this is allusion to my dead wife, which just screams Silent Hill 2 ripoff to me. So that's how I feel about it. Honestly, it feels like a giant slap in the face to me as a Resident Evil fan.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some of like the how Capcom wanted to bring out like certain aspects of previous games into this, but really fail hard at it, because number 5, which I'm going to actually read off in a bit, kind of tackles a little bit of that. To follow up with the last question, Capcom has introduced some recognizable features into Resident Evil, such as save rooms, item boxes. Some fans have argued that because of this, the game is a return to the series' roots and that it will be a good game because of these features. Do you think that adding such features makes the game a good quality product?
No.
No.
I'll say why. So we mentioned in the videos about the tape recorder. I thought that was interesting that it's not just a typewriter as a tape recorder. That's fine. But the main problem with that is that with the typewriters in the original games, you had the ink ribbons, and you could only use the ink ribbons a certain, you had a set number of ink ribbons, and also considering how many ink ribbons you used and how many times you saved throughout your playthrough of the game, you would get a certain score based on how much you saved. That seems to be completely absent in Resident Evil 7. You can save however many times you want, and as far as I know, you don't get any penalized for it at all, really. So there's that. And as for the item boxes, in the original games, you would use the item boxes for like if you needed to retrieve an item from the item boxes. Say you had like a puzzle you needed an item for, you would store it in an item box so you could have room for like ammo or something like that. And then if you needed it later, you could go back to the save room and pick it up. In 7, from what I see, it looks like you just have very limited inventory space. So you use the item box just to store stuff that you might need later. But I guess that's more or less the same when you think of it that way. But it still seems like it's a little bit tacked on to me. So I don't know. The puzzles have come back in 7, but they're easy puzzles. Like they're really piss easy puzzles, like matching the shadow. We saw in the gameplay video where you just match the shadow to the picture. That is, when you have that and you have puzzles, compare that to the original puzzles from Resident Evil, that they weren't Silent Hill-esque puzzles, but in the first game you had like a puzzle. I guess an example would be the one with the pictures, where it was like the beginning of life and the end of life or something like that. And I forget exactly what you had to do, but it was like it had to do with that.
To, if you don't mind me interjecting really quick, that's the one where you had to pick the you have to click a button on each particular painting from and this is PS1 Resident Evil, but they kind of changed it a little bit in the remake. You click on each like portrait, and there was a portrait of a baby, a little boy, a little bit older boy, and then a teenager, a young man, a fully grown man, and then a old man ready to die. And you have to kind of click that in that order, as if you're going in through an actual cycle of life. It was not only just kind of like a random puzzle, but it also kind of had like its own metaphor,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like that about the puzzle too. Like, you could tell there was a lot of thought put into it. But with these puzzles, it's like, not really. Even with Resident Evil 4, there was some amount of thought put into the puzzles. Even if they were simpler puzzles, they weren't like these. These are just kind of copy paste type puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, they've come back, but they're just hollow, shallow forms of their former selves. They're not even really the same.
Mm. Yeah, I'm gonna say that it just doesn't, and it's mostly because of the fact that, like, and I've said this before too. I think I've talked about this on air, and if I haven't, I know I've talked about it off air. You can add a lot of things that are quote unquote familiar to a franchise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the game is going to be good. It's nice to see that there are save rooms and item boxes, but that doesn't make the game good or a return to roots. I mean, if we go by that logic, games like Operation Raccoon City and Resident Evil 6 and Umbrella Corps are a return to roots because they have zombies in the game, And remember, with Operation Raccoon City, they were really pushing that. They were like, oh, well, the game has zombies and we're back in Raccoon City. And as if that made the game any good. Going by this sort of logic that, oh, well, the game is going with this horror theme, and it's got save rooms and item boxes. It's going to be a good game. It's a quality Capcom product. It's not true. Like, if I wanted a quality Capcom product, they would have actually listened to feedback. They would have went back to some of their older games and go like, okay, this is what makes our games good, or this is what made our old Resident Evil games good. Let's see what we can do to kind of take some of that, put that into our new game while also doing something new that maybe we haven't done before, or we can take a little bit of a risk with. Because then at that point you can make an average game. But with this, it's just kind of like, let's see what movies we can pull up that were really good. What's this new first person horror trend? Okay, let's go with that.
Well, they did also admit that they took inspiration from the Evil Dead, and
yeah, we will talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a later topic or question in the document. But like, it's like, oh, and just to kind of finish up my point as fast as I can, and then we'll take just a little small smidget of what people actually like about Resident Evil, and then call it a day. And that's just lazy development. That's not good game design. That's not, that doesn't make the game good. That's all I can really say at this point, is just having recognizable features does not make a game good.
Some of the fans are dense because my point is going to be brief, but because they have stuff like a tape recorder or a typewriter icon in the top screen of Resident Evil 6 does not mean the game is good. The game being good should be judged on gameplay merits alone, not due to the fact that there's some nostalgia. That stuff doesn't even work the same as it previously did. You see a typewriter in a new Resident Evil game, and it's an autosave, which defeats the purpose of having limited saves. And then you see stuff like, well, there's zombies in the game. There's zombies in RE6. That means that it's going back to roots. No, you can fucking literally do wrestling moves on these zombies, and that breaks the immersion. Once again, that breaks the horror, because now you're just like an action hero. So I think that what fans need to realize is, because when you go back to newer games and you see all this old stuff there, you need to take your nostalgia goggles off and see that it doesn't even operate the same as you think it does. It's totally different. They went back and they made the tape recorder in Resident Evil 7 have like unlimited saves, so there's no tension there. It's not like, oh shit, I have like about 3 ink ribbons and I only have like about like a certain amount of time to get through one area and I got to make these saves fast. What am I going to do? So it's not putting you in those dire situations anymore. It's like, here you go. This is stuff that was familiar with the older games in the series. You like nostalgia? Let's shove it in your face. And that is not good from a design point, and that is not good from just saying that it's going to make good gameplay. I think people are kind of blind when they say stuff like that, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, any final points before we move on to the next question?
No, I think you guys pretty much hit everything on the head.
Alrighty, so we're gonna let Ren take on number 6.
Okay, let me see here. There seems to be a misconception going around that there are zombies in the game. Capcom did release some images showcasing various different scans using a new process for development that they dubbed photogrammetry. Some of these images contain zombies. However, Capcom did confirm they did use this process for Umbrella Corps, so it is unlikely that 7 has zombies. However, in the small chance that the game would have zombies, what would improve the quality of the game? I don't think that the way that the enemies are, I don't think that it would improve the game in the sense that if you supposedly, from what they say, from what James said to us rather, if you have a shotgun or a certain overpowered weapon, then you can pretty much nuke through everything. So there is a problem with balancing in the game from what I'm hearing about. Having zombies does not improve it. Once again, it goes back to my original point. It's just for nostalgia. If they just shoehorn something into the game, but they don't operate the same as they used to, they aren't as threatening or menacing anymore. And some of the newer monsters rather in Resident Evil 7 sort of fit that trend that they aren't as scary as you think they are. And there's a lot of jump scares and stuff like that. So having a zombie jump scare you in VR first person, I would just laugh my ass off if that was in Resident Evil 7, because I'm like, well, they jumped the shark again.
Yep. So I just dropped the article that I got when making this particular question. Mm-hmm. And you can just kind of like see the scans, like, and there's videos on it too, and just how they're this is a new development process that they did. They did it with Umbrella Corps, and they were doing it with Resident Evil 7, and they were showing that it speeds up development time by like tenfold. You know, it improves the quality of like character models and various other things like environments and whatnot, because there's a bigger level of detail. It's basically a similar process to what Kojima did with the Fox engine. If you think about it, how like they had a whole room with like cameras all over the place, and they took pictures from different angles and whatnot. And you can see that there are like scans of like these Umbrella Corps soldiers, and then they have like scans of like some of the employees dressed as like zombies and whatnot. And people were like, oh yeah, this confirms that this is for Resident Evil 7. But if you actually read the article though on this document, it says that they went through this process with Umbrella Corps, so people went through this whole misconception. I was even kind of fooled a little bit before because I thought, well, they scanned Leon's RE4 jacket, so maybe Leon's going to be in this game. But then I realized, well, no, that can't be the case, because this is just a scanning process. Even if it was per se like zombies in the game or whatever, or rather for a Resident Evil game, that doesn't necessarily mean it's for 7. They could have just been doing it just for the sake of, hey, we have this new process, let's try this out, let's try to see how this works for development, because this is a completely new development process.
It sounds like an overglorified test to me.
And that's what it really is. A lot of people just kind of looked at this and were like, no, this confirms that we have zombies in the game. We have zombies in Resident Evil 7. You guys can stop bitching at it now. And it's like, what? Like, you're looking at a development process, and you're saying that this confirms that, something is in the game. You know,
No,
unless if Capcom said something that's the case, that is definitely not the case.
Now, if fans believe that, then by that logic, that essentially means that every cool thing you ever seen in concept art is in the final game, which is not, because some stuff, while it might be cool, they might leave things on the cutting room floor, and this is definitely the same case here with this whole test. It seems like just a test that they did to test out how some of the stuff in the game is going to look, how some of the stuff of the game is going to work. So yeah, it's just bad logic that people got kind of overhyped about this. But yeah, don't take everything at face value when it comes to development, because it could get cut the next day later.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You can go to any of the Souls series. You can go to their Wikipedia page, and there's sections on the Wikipedia page dedicated to unused content that was found in the game's files that was cut from the final product of the game. And there's tons of concept art for all of those games of stuff that never saw the light of day into any of the actual final builds. I mean, it's crazy to just immediately assume that everything that you see is immediately going to be put in the game. But with my overall thoughts on the adding in zombies, I have to agree more or less that it would have just been for nostalgia purposes. It really wouldn't have brought any more innovation to the game as a whole. If I really want a good zombie first-person shooter, I'd probably go play Left 4 Dead, or hell, I'd even play any of the Call of Duties that have a zombie mode if that was the case. So,
or Killing Floor 2, which
hell, freaking Killing Floor 2 as well.
Game is great.
Yeah, I mean, the photogrammetry thing seems like a pretty cool and fairly innovative process, and it does make the graphics look really nice. I mean, that's one thing I'll say about 7 that looks as good as the graphics. I mean, they look really nice, but that's really all I can say for it. In terms of enemies, like, you're mostly just fighting the hillbillies and the black goo monsters. So it would have been cool had they had more variety and maybe more enemies to fight, because that was one of my main complaints with the demo, is that there isn't really any enemies besides the BOW black goo monster that you fight in the basement. And, I mean, people were getting hyped about there potentially being zombies in the game. But, I think that would have been cool if they had actually added the zombies, or just something. Like, give us more enemies to fight, or just anything, really, because all you're really doing most of the game is running away from these hillbillies.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let you take on number 7. It's not too different from the last question, but we're gonna kind of delve more into enemies and enemy types.
I can do the next one if you guys want.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Go.
Oh, sorry,
go
I didn't hear you. Yeah. What do you think of enemy types that have been introduced thus far? I guess I'll go ahead. I don't think, pretty bad. Just because like I said, most of the enemies in this game are just deranged hillbillies. So, I mean, just pretty much think of The Hills Have Eyes, and you have Resident Evil 7, and the occasional Black Goo monster. I mean, I haven't really... I mean, because the guy that did play the game didn't, he's maybe like an hour into it, so I don't really know. There might be more enemies that do pop up that, we're not aware of. But from what we've seen and from what we know, it just seems to mostly just be these hillbillies and just the BOWs. I mean, I just wish there were more enemies. They don't have to be zombies. They could be something else. They just give me something, Give me something to be afraid of. Give me something, some kind of a challenge other than go into this room, find this item. Oh no, there's a hillbilly coming. You better run and hide. Or it's that one dude, fucking Frank, that's gonna come back, even though he killed him like twice already.
Oh, you mean Jack?
Or Jack, whatever the fuck. I don't care anymore. I don't even
Might
care.
as well call him Filthy Frank.
Yeah, Filthy Frank
Junior,
comes
I guess.
back.
I don't know.
Have to fucking kill him again. He'll come back and his brain's exposed and all that shit. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I just, there's no tension. There's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, the hillbillies aren't really scary. They're just, an annoyance, if anything. I mean, the Black Goo monsters are a little bit unsettling, but, I mean, they're not really like you can apparently take them down really easily. So I would say they're threatening, but if only just in appearance, because you can easily kill them. They're not like the Tyrant or Nemesis or anything like that where they won't go down really easily. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that there needs to be more enemies and just more of a variety of them, and the game really has none of that.
Yeah, from what I've been told, those are the only two enemy types. It's just the hollow gems or holograms or whatever the hell they call them. The molded, as most people know them as, the black goo monsters, and then the bakers. That's all there really is in the game. And if that's really all there is, then this is not, kind of going back to the whole roots thing. This is not a return to roots, because if this was a return to roots, you'd have a multitude of enemy variety. Even if there were enemies that were similar to each other, there were some design differences. There were something different about that variation you would go up against. For example, the lickers in Resident Evil 2. You see them all throughout the police station and whatnot, and then you get into the labs, and then there's like these beefier green like versions that are stronger and whatnot.
Oh,
and
the
it's
Leechman.
like no.
You were talking about 2, not 0. Never mind.
Yeah, I'm talking about the liquors. Yeah. You have all those, and it's like, hey, that's cool, because there's like, even though they're very similar, they're different in various different ways, whether it be design, appearance, the way that they deal damage and whatnot, various different things that come into play. Whereas 7 is just like, no, this is all we got, because this is what we think Return to Roots. This is what we think fans want. I made Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City. You can thank me for that. Give me all your money now. And that's what this whole game is.
You mentioned damage too, and there doesn't really seem to be much variation in what character or how or who really, like, because in the original games there was like, this enemy type can damage you a certain amount, and this enemy type you have to be more careful of, because he can, when he hits you, it counts for more damage. But in 7, it's just like, well, pretty much every enemy can hit you, and do equal amounts of damage, from what I've seen.
So does anybody else have anything to say?
No, I think you guys, like just before, you guys hit pretty much every key point.
I'll let you take on number 8, Daybreaker.
Alrighty, it says, do you think people are actually pre-ordering the game, or rather do you think that it's anywhere near the amount Capcom is hoping for? Well, I don't think it's going to garner nearly the amount of pre-orders and units sold that Capcom was originally hoping for. But I was an employee of the GameStop Corporation for almost a year, so I know the nature of the beast when it comes to consumerism. And regardless if this game shit the bed, regardless if this game was just the epitome of the pissest, poorest attempt at a video game you could possibly make, people would still buy it. And that's unfortunately a plague in gaming society as kind of a whole, and the gaming community as a whole, is that trying to convince a non-gamer that speaking with your wallet is probably the most effective way to get a company to sort of listen to you and to actually give you what you want. It's really hard to convince the average consumer that. I mean, just take a look at EA and the millions that they make. They can rehash the same game, any sport. They can rehash the same game, change a couple of the characters here and there and what teams they're on, change a couple names here and there, and bam, there you go. There's the next year's version of the game. Same game you played last year. Nothing mechanically has changed. It's all just different people in these different spots. I mean, that's literally all they have to do. So it's really sad. But that's the unfortunate thing, is just it's really hard to convince non-consumers non-gamers that are consumers that this is a bad purchase. And of course, also too, you got to remember there are those purist fanboy tryhards that will buy anything and they'll jump on it if it has Resident Evil on the title. It doesn't even matter the quality or the caliber of the game that's made. It could literally be just a video of one of the developers taking a dump, and people would still fucking buy it. And that's the really sad thing about it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say some things, but yeah. I mean, people are gonna buy it regardless. I don't think it's gonna be, the sales that Capcom are hoping they're going to get back for the game. But a lot of people are obviously going to be pre-ordering the game and buying it. But I just don't think. I would be surprised if Capcom made back the amount of money that they were hoping to get, or get the amount of sales they were hoping for. But I've been wrong before. Yeah,
Capcom was expecting 4 million units sold, by the way, and yet they're acting like this is what's going to get that 4 million units. I know a lot of people that were, most people were very optimistic about this game. A lot of people who saw the leaks were backing away from the game as soon as they saw the leaks. I've even been told by people that they know people who were hyped for the game that, once they saw those leaks, they dropped their pre-order because they thought it was just that bad. So I don't think Capcom's going to make 4 million. I think that, part of the problem was them going up and being like, yeah, we want 4 million units, because they've had that problem before in the past where they said, well, we want this amount of units sold for this particular game. And then they marked down the prices, like with DMC, for example, where they said like 5 million units sold for that game. And then they dropped it down all the way to like 1 million. And they didn't reach that amount until a year after the game launched. So they don't consider these games successes until after launch. And that's what I expect with this game. I think that this game, it won't get 4 million. And I think a lot of people are just, if they do buy the game, they'll buy it like at discounted price or whatever, when the game is no longer at $60. And then Capcom will be like, yeah, it's a success. We made our 4 million units, a year or so after the fact.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ren?
I think obviously people are going to pre-order it, not to the insane numbers that Capcom is expecting, but I do think that people are going to legitimately still try the game out because, there's the first buyers that try everything out regardless. But I think word of mouth is ultimately going to be the downfall of this game if it's bad. I think that a lot of people are going to buy other stuff in the process. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming out after the fact. So them wanting, like, you said they wanted 4 million in sales?
They wanted 4 million in sales. And actually, to kind of just really quickly add on to your point, we have things that were coming out actually a little bit before Resident Evil 7 this month and on the same day as Resident Evil 7, like Yakuza 0, Gravity Rush 2, which just came out today, actually. Tales of Berseria. I think Kingdom Hearts was also coming out as well. So you had all these games, coming out at this particular point in time. And afterwards, you got February, and we've seen in the past where like a game could come out a month later and it does so much better. Hello, Metal Gear Rising.
Yeah, so them competing for those months, February, March, all that, for lifelong sales, that's going to be pretty steep for them, I think. I think if they put out good content, Neo's coming out, a lot of stuff that people are looking forward to, then I think they might possibly get buried because there's going to be a lot of other stuff that people might want to play. Are they really going to risk going out and getting a game that's subpar once the real reviews start pouring in, not the ones from the journalists that got paid under the table, the real people who actually, the critics, like the real critics of the actual game. If it's bad, they're going to tell everyone and everyone's going to know, and word of mouth is going to happen. So I think that in terms of going against other games, it might have a problem there. But we'll see what happens. I think there's going to be a lot of other stuff to look forward to, so it's probably not going to have that much pre-orders or have that much sales at the end of the day.
So we're gonna let who just read the last one? That was
I did.
Okay. So I'm gonna read off the next one. In a recent interview about the game with Jun Takeuchi, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. Takeuchi. Yeah, we'll just go with that. Delved into the inspiration. What's notable is that the game supposedly used Evil Dead as a base for the game's inspiration. What impact do you believe this has left on the game? And there is a quote. We have heard a lot of fan feedback from obviously RE fans saying that they want us to create a quote unquote proper survival horror without a focus on action. Adding on to what I personally said, I am a hardcore fan of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, and I wanted to think of the movie as a base for Resident Evil 7.
Can I go first?
Yes.
Okay, so Evil Dead, great movie. It was mostly about being stuck, isolated in the woods. So they're trying to capture this element of being at this plantation, stuck and alone with this crazy family. But the problem with Evil Dead and this quote in general for them getting their inspiration is that it doesn't really feel like it's something worthwhile for Resident Evil 7. And that is because of the Baker family. I think personally, with the way they go around and swear all the time and they go around, it just kills the overall suspense. When it comes to the Evil Dead, it was a very slow build-up when the beginning of the movie started. And this game does not have that tension or build-up. It seems like you're just thrown right in to an unknown situation. I mean, sometimes for horror, that's good, but it's not as compelling as Evil Dead. And I watched that movie countless times. And the stuff they were doing back then with the practical effects and all this other stuff was crazy. No one ever seen it before. So I think in terms of trying to capture onto something, it goes back again to trend following. I would love to see an Evil Dead video game like reimagined and them to have it sort of be like a complete survival horror experience. But in terms of RE7 capturing it, the atmosphere, the tension, it seems all dumbed down. And I don't think that's a good quote in general. I mean, even for Resident Evil's sake, we never really stay in one location for way too long. So that's what a lot of people are worried about with the plantation setting is like, are we just going to be stuck here for the entire game and that's it? We don't get to, diversify ourselves around something giant and massive and expansive. And that's the problem with like trying to blend these two into one.
Yeah. I don't really even see the inspiration in this game from Evil Dead. The only thing that I see that could even be remotely related to Evil Dead is the chainsaw. Other than that, I don't really see the inspiration. Like Ren said, Evil Dead had a slow build up. This game, you just get dropped into this just crazy situation with these rednecks. To me, it's more like The Hills Have Eyes or something like that, or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if anything. I don't see Evil Dead at all, honestly.
It reminds me a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and House of a Thousand Corpses. It's like Rob Zombie in that movie had a baby and it turned out to be RE7.
It's funny you mentioned that, though, because it really seems like Rob Zombie was behind this fucking game when you think about it. It has elements of like just something Rob Zombie would be a part of. You got the fucking hillbillies and the swearing and the gore and all that. It just feels like something he would have had a hand in almost. So it's kind of funny.
That's how it feels like, exactly down to the wire. And these characters, they just create more of a. I mean, Evil Dead did have the whole comedic moments with like Ash going crazy, but you actually like believe the situation. That's what made it not so outlandish. For Resident Evil, it's just I'm gonna gut you like a piggy, and it's like, oh my god, dude, it's so cringeworthy.
So apologies for the little inconvenience, just kind of some tech issues. But Chaos, if you had anything else to say.
No, I was just kind of, I didn't really have anything else to say about it.
Okay. So I guess I can take this point. This is where I find the game to have more issues, because it seems like they were like, okay, let's watch all these different movies and whatnot, right? These classic old school horror movies that a lot of Americans like, right? And kind of left an impact on the horror genre as far as films are concerned. And they didn't, they did that, and that's totally fine if you wanted to take inspiration from that for a completely new game. But we're talking about an established franchise, and I think it would have made a lot more sense if you were going to take inspiration from anything, really. You should have taken inspiration from what is the actual series roots. Like, go back to the original PlayStation 1 Resident Evils, go back to the Origins collection, play 0 and remake, and see what and even like playing Resident Evil Code Veronica, see what makes those games so highly acclaimed by fans. And I think that's what would have been a better inspiration than going like, yeah, we watched Evil Dead and we thought that this was a great way to base the game off of. We wanted our characters to be like they were in that movie. We wanted our setting to be exactly like in that movie, and that's dumb. It's like I was saying in my video with how Kawada said that, going to first person was a smart decision. And I think that's also the, next quote that we'll be talking about in the next question. It's a dumb fucking statement. In my opinion, it's just people like him, like June and Masachika. I don't understand why they're even allowed to work on something like this if, they're saying things like this or based on their track records and whatnot. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. I mean, it's not bad to be inspired by ideas, but you have to take it, do something original with it, and make it your own idea. What Capcom is doing, and it's very obvious why people don't like this, is because it's way too much copy and paste. So they're taking all these ideas and they're trying to see what sticks to the wall. It seems at this point that they're really desperate instead of taking a homage and making something their own. And that's the problem with RE7. It doesn't feel like itself. And I feel if this game flops, there's no way they can recover from the fact that they had so much identity crisis that they can't get back on their feet anymore, because it's like, well, now you have fans divided with this first person garbage. Then you had a third person RE, then you had fixed camera. So it's like, at the end of the day, what is it going to be? And I feel this choice is going to be a lot harder, since they said this whole first person bullshit is very innovative to them. So it's like, either continue down this route or go back to the drawing board, scrap everything, and really make everything shine on Remake 2.
Right. And I want to kind of interject on that too. Like, I think, I think we've talked about the fact that, like, Resident Evil 7 can flop, and that might not be as bad as, say, like Resident Evil 2 Remake flopping, because that's something that's even bigger than Resident Evil 7, whether people want to admit it or not. And not to mention that I think the only way that they can fix this, identity crisis, like, problem that they're having is just end the series where it's at now, make an 8, or just end it where it's at now, reboot it, and only make the things, like, say, make up to Code Veronica or up to Resident Evil 3 the only things that are canon, and just make an alternate timeline that is, more rooted in what, Resident Evil should be, what, as far as avoiding that identity crisis, sticking away from that and just calling that like an alternate timeline, that's completely ridiculous and out of focus. Whereas this whole new rebooted timeline is more in line with what the franchise should be at.
Or make more like actual good side games. I mean, I said this not too long ago on Twitter. I agree with you totally. All good things have to come to an end. Uncharted did not keep making Uncharted 5, Uncharted 6, Uncharted 7. They ended it at 4 because they felt it was the most comfortable to do. I don't think Capcom has that same sort of philosophy because the only thing in their eyes right now is dollar signs. And they know that Resident Evil is a very big franchise to them. It makes a lot of money, but that mentality means that they're milking it straight to the ground. So they need to either end it or focus on projects not involved with the mainline timeline anymore. And that's what's happening right now. And it's very much a shame to see as an RE fan. You guys really have to understand, like, I understand if people like the game and they're going to buy it, but at the same time, do you want to see your franchise destroyed like Metal Gear is going to be destroyed this year? It's like, pick one or the other.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I mean, like, you know, the way that we've seen how Capcom is handled, like, Capcom ruined one of my favorite characters so far. I mean, yeah, sure, you could argue that they've ruined other characters throughout the years, but for me, Hunk was always one of my favorite characters, and they completely fucked his character. You know, with Umbrella Corps being canon and putting him into that game, and now, you know, if theories are anything to go by with 7, him doing a face reveal and saying that he's Chris Redfield at the end of 7, you know, that just ruins his character. Like, I think what made his character so great was that, you know, he was very mysterious, but you also just knew that he had this kind of history that he was this guy who could never be killed, and everyone else around him would be killed but him, and he would always come out of his mission successful. You know, and I think that's what made me like that character so much. And now seeing what he is now, it's like, I don't even think this is the same character anymore. And this, you know, that's just a small scale thing compared to like looking at the franchise overall.
It really did seem like they were going to end it with 6, from what I remember from the advertisements. But, you know, I just feel like Ren said, they're going to drag it out as long as they possibly can for money, just pretty much to milk it.
So I'm going to let Ren read off number 10.
Let me pull up the document. Hold on. Okay, so to follow up to the last question, in another recent interview, Masachika Kawada claimed that the game is more immersive due to the perspective change and that the series veterans would notice familiar things within the new title. Do you believe this to be true? Also, there's a bullet point from his quote, I believe. I wouldn't necessarily call it the most difficult Resident Evil game. What I will say is I think it is the best camera to offer the highest level of immersion in a survival horror environment. I think that despite the camera perspective changes, longtime fans, when they pick up the title, they'll realize there's a lot of elements of familiarity there. For this quote, I just disagree because we saw the game. And it's easy. It's not even a challenge on normal from what people are saying. For the quote itself, it goes back to like putting in new stuff and putting in old stuff and trying to reel fans in to do something new and different. This does not make your game innovative if there's these aspects in mind, if you don't do anything original with them. So the camera follows suit. And for the camera, it doesn't really change the fact that the game looks boring. And that's what people have to realize, is that you can polish up something nice and good. It could look good graphically with the RE engine. There's no disputing that, but we're talking about gameplay here. We're talking about them changing something completely different to a lot of people who play previous Resident Evil games. If they see this, they're like, why am I fighting hillbillies now? Why are the enemies piss easy? And why can I down everything with one shot with the shotgun, as opposed to playing on very hard in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and getting your ass kicked? So that doesn't make the game good. If anything, you know what it makes the game sound like? It makes it sound like it's casual and they're appealing to a certain demographic a lot more than just making a video game that they love and enjoy.
I can't wait for you to see what the next quote is, because it's so contradictory to what this quote is. I made a whole video on this, and I know Event talked about it in his video, and he talked about, like, you know, There's an article where there are two different articles. There's one that only gives you this quote, and then there's one that gives you like the entire interview. And in that entire interview, he completely disregards like third-person horror games, So he completely disregards games like Silent Hill, the classic Resident Evil games, and things like Alone in the Dark and whatnot, And
I got a simple question.
Mhm.
If he's neglecting all those games right there, they are the backbone of survival horror.
Yeah.
And they're taking inspiration from certain things to try to make their game better. Why is he neglecting something that's actually good? It makes no sense to me.
Because he's a fucking fraud.
And I have to say, like, first person, and I said this in my video too, first person does not make your game more immersive, because if that's the case, games like Silent Hill 2 are not good. They're not immersive because they're in third person, or games like Resident Evil 2, the game that pretty much put this entire franchise into a bigger stratosphere, I guess. Higher expectations. It set higher expectations for this franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Resident Evil 2 considered to be one of the best games, but because it's in third person, because it's a classic survival horror game and it's not in first person, Kawada would otherwise claim that it's not immersive enough because it's not in first person, And I think, saying that, like, this is the highest way you can include immersion, it's just dumb. Like, it's a dumb fucking statement, as I said in my video. And to say that the game is not the most difficult, well, yeah, no fucking shit. It's pretty easy to get by. And this is coming from somebody who's played it at Capcom.
I'm going to take a recent example, actually. Evil Within, I know a lot of people has issues with Evil Within in terms of like the difficulty and some stuff included, but one thing people cannot say is that the environment and how that game looked isn't very immersive, because the way everything is just built in terms of the level design is very innovative and cool to look at, but it doesn't matter what perspective you use. All that matters is the amount of effort, detail, and craft that goes into how the game is presented to you as the player. And I think that is what Capcom is forgetting. They're forgetting that the game needs to be presented to the player in a way where the fear is the fear of the unknown. One of the game developers we interviewed said this not too long ago. We fear what we don't know. If we're just seeing some fat drunken hillbillies chase us and say he's going to make us squeal like pigs, it is not scary in the slightest. And I think that they're way too hung up on this camera angle, and they didn't really craft a good game around it, because as we all said on the panel, it just looks boring for what we saw.
And I want to add on to that last point that you made too. It's funny because they said that the game was in first person, but wasn't initially made for VR, and I want to call bullshit on that. I think that, because let's face it, AAA devs, they probably know about like certain tech that's coming out way before any of us do, right? And
oh yeah,
that's something that nobody can really dispute unless one of these AAA companies want to come out and say no, that's not the case. I think they knew about PlayStation VR, or at least they looked at something like the Oculus Rift and were like, you know what? We're going to be releasing this game on multi-plat. Let's throw in that VR support. Let's make this game strictly for VR. And that's what it just seems like. They made this game more for the fact that VR was coming, and they wanted to get on that VR craze, hoping that people would buy into it, and not really thinking, how can we make a new Resident Evil game that fixes a lot of the flaws that we've had with the last few Resident Evil games as of recent years, and how can we make a game that actually fixes a lot of the complaints that people have had that were fans of the classic games but would refuse to play some of the more modern games. What can we do to get fans' trust back with this new iteration? And they didn't do that. They just said, VR is out, let's jump straight to that.
Yeah.
Oh, let me check something really quickly. And for fans who are saying that they never had this concept in mind, Resident Evil 7 was in development since 2004. Outlast came out in 2003, a year before Resident Evil 7 was in development. So
2013
yeah, 2013. My bad. 2013. So it came out then. It was a year before. They had to look at that game and probably be like, okay, this is very successful. A lot of people are emulating, this style of Amnesia because Amnesia did it beforehand. A lot of people are really liking this game. Why not, try to catch on and do our own rendition? So just because you say that, well, just because it was coincidental and VR came out in our development time, that sounds like a load of bullshit to me. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that a lot of people were buying the VR headset, so they wanted to make a profit. And they said, you know what, let's just shoehorn this into our game and see where it goes. And a lot of people are playing. They even say, like, at their kiosk or whatever, we have Resident Evil 7 in VR. So that does not scream them being genuine about that at all.
Yeah, I think they made it with that in mind. And, that's what they wanted to try to make their game based off. Is let's have people play in VR. We're not gonna think about it being played in any other way. Just think that's the main idea for it. It's just VR. And I think that's a good point.
What do you think about this, Daybreaker?
Just like we were on question 10, right?
Yep.
We're
talking about
the camera angle. I think I already said earlier, we brought up the comparison that games can still be immersive if in another camera angle, that they don't necessarily have to rely solely on the first-person perspective. VR, I know, is really the hype nowadays. It's going pretty crazy, and a lot more so than originally once thought. I mean, with the failure of Nintendo's Virtual Boy, you would think VR wouldn't really have, a huge place in today's market. But as the technology advances and as we see things being developed, it seems like VR is becoming more and more what will eventually, maybe not within the next couple of years, but I could see somewhere down the line when I'm an old man, that VR is the standard of video games. I think it's just you have to keep in mind, though, it's much like console gamers nowadays. As graphics become better, you have to keep in mind that people are still playing consoles for these type of things. So it's not everybody's going to want to use a VR headset. Not everybody's going to want to dish out the money for one. Some people would just rather sit on their couch or their chair or whatever and play it with controller, or hell, even a mouse and keyboard. So to design a game more inclined for the VR experience of it, as opposed to making a solid game that is in favor of both aspects, is kind of the big problem here with Resident Evil 7, because I agree it caters more towards the idea of the VR gimmick more than it really does the first-person horror element.
That was a good discussion, so I'm going to let Chaos read off number 11.
All right. We talked a little bit about what the producer for the game stated about the difficulty in the quote covered in the last question. Kawada states that he wouldn't consider the game to be the most difficult in the series. However, Capcom's Hajime Haruichi claims that the game's difficulty is higher than previous iterations, with the article using the title Resident Evil 7 will be the hardest game in the series. What are your thoughts on these conflicting statements? There's a bullet point. I guess the quote, the difficulty being a little higher than in previous titles is definitely intentional. We wanted to focus more on the aspect of fear. We worried that if the game's too easy and these enemy encounters aren't too big of a deal, then players aren't going to feel that tension, not going to feel that anxiety. We wanted to make sure that even if you're pitted up in a 1 versus 1 situation, that one enemy is capable of killing you.
I just need to ask a question really quickly before you go. Did he just contradict himself in this sentence?
Probably. Let me see what.
He contradicted Kawada's statement, which was made like I think a week prior to this statement.
Yeah, because
you're right. Yeah, he said that Resident Evil 7, like he didn't say it would be the hardest game in the series, and then this guy said it is going to be the hardest.
Yeah, so it's some conflicting statements here and some contradictions.
Which is both bullshit, by the way. But
yeah, both of them.
Yeah. Did you want to go, Chaos, or?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, this basically so he's saying that like that it's going to be like really hard, which we've seen from the gameplay and we've seen ourselves in the demo. It's not, because like I've said before, there's not a lot of enemies you're fighting. You're just fighting the hillbillies and what was the proper name for that black?
It's like hollow gems or holograms or something like
holograms, whatever.
Some people call them the molded, which is weird, but
Well, yeah,
Much
like
more
you can
fucking
kill
fitting
those
name than
things easily
hologram.
with a shotgun or just probably with a pistol even. And as we even saw in the gameplay video, the third gameplay video, that it disappears if you go out of the room and come back, which I don't know if it's a glitch, but yeah, that happens. So, I mean, it just doesn't seem like the game has much challenge. I mean, most of the time you're just item collecting or running away or something like that.
Also, Dom, every article called them the molded. Like,
Did
I'm
they?
not shitting you. Yes,
Yeah.
every article.
Yeah, I saw
So
one.
I don't
video.
know what you were talking about with that,
Dude,
because I've never heard them called the
there was
hologram.
one video. I want to say it was from GameSpot, and they said that that's what they were called. It was really weird because I'm just like, what, and they said like, oh, they're like the hunters or whatever, and I'm like, from all the gameplay that I have seen, there are only two enemy types. And that must be what they were referring to, because there's nothing in there that, that was described, that was like that per se.
Yeah.
Well, it's weird because they resemble more of the regenerators, but every article I've seen called them the molded. It's just weird. They don't stick to a consistent story, even with the creatures, so it makes no sense.
I was gonna say,
unless
though,
if that video was completely misinformed.
yeah.
I don't know.
That's always a possibility too, but there are things where like, we hear, for example, like, what was it? We Happy Few. People called that a survival horror, and it's actually just a thriller.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and the developers have even told people that no, it is not a survival horror. So it could just be journalists just saying something because that's what everyone else is saying, right? That could just be misinformation going out, but that is something that we can end up finding out later on. But continue.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, just compare that to the older Resident Evil games where you have proper boss fights and all the zombies you have to think about conserving your ammo and what you need to do. Should I kill these zombies before going in? Or should I burn the zombie and waste my matches, something like that, so they don't come back as Crimson Heads. There's
that was
a lot of
kerosene and
or kerosene, yeah. But there's like a lot of strategizing that went into that, and there's not any of that in 7. It's just it's non-existent.
Did anybody else want to go, like maybe Daybreaker before I went, or?
No, I'm good. We can go on.
Okay.
What question is this?
This is number 11, and
Number 11. Yeah, I said no. I said earlier, like this is definitely contradiction at its finest. They said the game was going to be hard. It doesn't look hard. Now there's people saying it's going to be easy. This is sort of the stuff that I'm talking about with Capcom having conflicting statements. They really need to just nail down what this game was supposed to be, because it would have made a lot of interviews and articles a lot more easier to understand. But like I said, there's people saying you can just get a shotgun and blast everything away. If that's really true on any difficulty, then that sort of eliminates everything they tried to say in the original statement of them saying that the game was going to be hard. The way I feel about it is you don't want a Resident Evil game to be easy. because I'm pretty sure you would probably have stuff like I think I'm not even gonna say ORC because that game on professional was dog shit. I would say I can't even think of even the recent Resident Evils 4 through 6. They had some difficulty to them, like they had challenge. You can get one-shotted by bosses.
Yeah, they 6 had patched in, what was it, No Hope?
Yeah.
Which was even harder than professional, which I can only imagine how much more bullshit that is.
I played it actually. If a zombie grabs you, you're essentially dead automatically. It's an automatic death.
Right.
So if they don't have, I mean, they could have put something like that in there that's fun. I mean, Doom, they have Ultra Nightmare, which if you die once, you will start back at the first level, which is fucking ridiculous. But I mean, people would have went for it, man, because they love doing stuff like that. There's those masochists out there that plays games on that level and they try to beat them. So I guess Capcom could have did a challenge instead of putting in these dumb advertisements where you can buy Resident Evil 7 diapers.
Yeah, or fucking
Right.
Scented candles that smell like blood for $20. Which, by the way, is that shit? You know, if you have that shit lit, and then like the police come over to your house and be like, "Did you like murder somebody over here, sir? I'm gonna have to search your house." You know, like they're gonna think you murdered somebody.
Yeah, there's a body in the garage. His name is Jack Baker.
Right. I would say that what they should have did, as far as difficulty is concerned, and this statement is very contradictory. It almost seems like Kawada just kind of comes in there and he's just like, okay, how are you guys finishing up the game? And then just kind of goes around, walks around Japan, maybe takes a smoke, comes back every once in a while to see how the progress is going, but not actually really staying there to like correct anything, make sure that, you know, things are actually fun or challenging. I think that what they should have did, they should have looked at something like Resident Evil 3, for example, you know, because everyone likes to claim that this game is a lot like Resident Evil 3. Well, if it is, you know, look at that game and look at what that game did very well as far as balancing is concerned. One of the things that I absolutely love about that game is the RNG. I really love that aspect about the game because you can go into a room, right? You can tackle things in a certain order, and then all of a sudden, you know, 1 minute that, you know, you would have thought that, okay, well, I'm prepared for this, and, you know, there's definitely zombies on the other side of this room, and all of a sudden, there's hunters in that room, right? And it completely throws you out of loop, and I think something like that would have just made the difficulty, but instead we hear things about like, oh, well, you know, you can easily just kill these, you know, molded with like 2 pistol shots, as long as you land them on the head. Otherwise, you could just completely delimb them and get them that way.
The bosses don't sound harder either. It's like you got Jack Baker running around with half his brain out. It's just so stupid.
I mean, hell, even with the gameplay that we watched, I don't know if this was necessarily mentioned, but with the gameplay that we watched during the first encounter with Jack,
he disappeared.
He not only disappeared, but he gets stuck on the car, and he got stuck on a car and like a shelving in the garage area, and he just ran in place. So it's like you've not only got these lackluster encounters, but a brain dead AI behind him. So it's like really, there's no challenge if the AI itself doesn't even know how to play the game properly.
Yeah, I would never mix bad AI with Resident Evil. That's just uncommon unless you're playing a side game or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a good point to end off on. So I'm going to let Daybreaker read off number 12.
Alrighty. So number 12 says, if you were a director in Capcom and helmed the Resident Evil series, what would you do? What do you think could have been the proper way to follow up with the sequel after the events of Resident Evil 6? What do you really anticipate for a true sequel that remedies all the issues from the previous games? Well, for starters, I would definitely try to aim, me personally, I would try to aim to go back and emulate what the first 3 games did right. I would definitely probably say that I would, like, in the wake of kind of like, you know, how like Capcom had said that the demo for Resident Evil 7 was not going to be definitive of the final product, which we all know that's a crock of shit. I personally would like, if I was going to do a demo like that, I would have it in like the fixed camera angle style from a third person perspective and kind of gauge the reaction of what people liked, what they didn't like, and really take to heart, what the fans truly want. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones buying your game. So you want to try to get these fans behind you, that you want these reviews to be good. You don't want to have to pay under the table to have a bunch of, big companies like IGN and shit freaking give the game 9s and 10s, So not being like overly engrossed in the series, I would definitely look at the original 3 and probably try to kind of work off of something like that. As what I would do to fix a lot of the series problems. I know a lot of people didn't really care necessarily for the shift to the third person perspective. And I know that like with 5 and 6 specifically, it became more action oriented than it really did horror. So really and truly, I would probably want to look at something like Evil Within. I think Evil Within, even if not as well as it could have been, I definitely think that would be a good place to start. You can have survival horror in a third-person perspective. You can have those stealth elements. It doesn't just need to be a game of cat and mouse. Some situations where you're properly like let's say like right at the beginning of the game, just from a hypothetical, your character doesn't have any weaponry or anything like that. It would make sense to be afraid of the force or being or monster, whatever you want to make that could potentially be in the same vicinity as you. But then I would make it to where, like, once you get those weaponry, you feel empowered. You don't have to, always run. I mean, granted, you're going to want to like conserve ammo if you really play off the survival horror element. But at the same time, you want to be able to know that you are just as deadly as the thing that's chasing you. So that's definitely something that I would try to put into a game if I were to head a Resident Evil title. That's just, all I can really say about that, really.
For me, I think they need to. If it was my choice, I would have went back to the concept of the original Resident Evil 4, where they ended the series with Leon being infected. I think that would have been very ballsy of them to do. Put a main character that's been in the series for years and put him in a state of absolute crisis. I think doing something like that will really show, holy shit, Capcom is getting very serious with the storytelling. And I would have incorporated elements from Resident Evil 4 where there's the camera, so that has the best control, and it just feels right. And then I would bring back elements from Resident Evil 3 with the pursuing enemies, a monster actually chasing you down, and he's just coming after you relentlessly. And I think that's really good because the player is always going to be on their toes no matter what with this new camera angle. So putting all that stuff together and making a great story on top of this, that would have made for the perfect Resident Evil game, in my opinion. I just think that what they should have did to fix a lot of the problems that the previous entry had was making it all too bloated. I think it should have been a singular focus for the campaign. Just focus on Leon and other characters from the series coming in, tying up their story arcs. Maybe you can have the second playable character or something in as a bonus, because this is what I liked games doing, like Tenchu, where there was a completely different storyline you could play with the character and see some of their backstory, but it was happening at the same time. Focus on two characters and then have this big finale where there's this giant fight with the monsters chasing you, and one of the main characters dies, or multiple main characters dies, because lately for the Resident Evil series, Capcom hasn't had the balls to kill someone off, and I think them doing that would be a definitive, yeah, this is it, we're fucking serious about this, we're ending the series. A great sort of comparison would be Halloween H2O, where you fucking think that Jamie Lee Curtis is going to reach out to Michael Myers and she chops off his fucking head. And it really just screams the end. It should scream something like that if they're going to end off with a another sequel. So that's how I felt about it.
Yeah, I think Ren pretty much hit the nail on the head. I was gonna say more or less the same thing. They just, it sucks because they're too interested in trying to milk the series. If that weren't the case, I really feel like they should have tried to have a proper ending for it, or just did something like that. That's what Resident Evil 6 should have been, in my opinion. It should have been the game to kind of end off the series, and it shouldn't have been what basically it ended up being, this huge Michael Bay action fest. Which it ended up being. And, like Ren said, that they don't have the balls to kill off a lot of these characters. I know they're, like, iconic characters for the franchise, but they really don't want to kill off any of them, it seems. And, they just don't want to take risks in general.
I mean, I think they're missing the fear of death as well, because, like, this is what sort of killed their writing too, is that the characters now, they feel superhuman because of the way they written them. If there was a chance that a character could die, then you feel sorry for them, you will feel some sort of emotion, and then it will harken back to the story and the horror integrating itself into one another by having the fact that, hey, you can actually fucking die. It doesn't matter if you have all these skills or not, you can get killed. So I would go back to basic fundamentals. I think Capcom having this idea of whatever sticks to where we throw it at the wall is very stupid. They need to look at the core and find out what works and what doesn't. And I don't think they're doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, like, for my personal game, because I would like a lot of personal games from the Resident Evil franchise, but I think ideally, if we're just going to talk about how it would play and maybe like a basic story, I would look at something like 3.5 as well. But the difference here is that I wouldn't necessarily take the whole infection thing. I would just mostly look at the play style, because I think that, some people will not want to go back to fixed camera angles, but some people will not want to play over the shoulder. And I think having the hybrid style would actually kind of bridge the gap to be like, well, okay, you can play it for movement purposes. It plays like a fixed camera angle Resident Evil, but for combat purposes, it plays like a RE4 style game. And I don't think that would necessarily be bad. I mean, there's a fan actually that's working on a 3.5 full fan game where you could even set it to over the shoulder or set it to fixed camera specifically, or just leave it at the hybrid style that how 3.5 was made. So I think that would have definitely been good. I think that I wouldn't want to bring back like someone like Leon or Chris, because I feel as though we kind of already seen them a little bit too much as of recent years. So I think where their story was at in 6, we should just leave it as that, at least for now, unless if we bring him over to like a side game that's completely, whatever. I think what I would do is maybe either bring back like someone like Rebecca, or maybe someone like Jill Valentine, and just kind of have them finish off the story at that point. What they would do and where they would go is beyond me, but I think the bigger thing too is like talking about like characters dying. I think what would be really interesting is I know a lot of people really like Billy, but maybe they could have like someone like him die, because we don't know what happens to him after 0. And they could be like, well, he got captured by Umbrella and he technically died, or, was experimented on, and they made like something new out of it or whatever. But
yeah, I actually wanted the opposite. I think Billy should come back. Like, I feel like there are characters we've seen like Leon and Chris that, they've been in multiple games, but like characters like Billy or like Rebecca, we really don't see much of at all.
Yeah, and I would agree. To an extent, like I just think that, if we're going to talk about characters dying off, though, I think that would be a little bit more fitting. Or maybe at least with like something like I will give Resident Evil 6 credit, they did kill off Pierce, and that was something like so out of left field, and I think that was interesting. Like, maybe if they did introduce a new character that dies off, that would be good. I don't know, it just I think that it would be really hard to just continue the story with characters from the previous games that we've seen numerous times. I think if anything, this should just kind of be left to the Revelation series or any other like spin-off side titles, and that would be really the time to just kind of bring those characters that we haven't seen in a while back, and
like do that for Billy or Rebecca or something like that.
Yeah, or even like Carlos. Carlos, I've wanted to see for a really long time. For him to come back, I think that would work too. And I think, like via files, I think I would explain, what happens after 6, and I would have hey, the BSAA and Chris ended up finding out that, Ada was actually falsely accused and whatnot. And it was actually Carla. And they find all the documentation of how Carla was cloned and whatnot. I think stuff like that, just small files, because you can even look at something like Resident Evil 5 where you go through and there's a file detailing okay, well, this is how the Lost Plagas got to this point in Africa in Resident Evil 5, and you find out that Umbrella was enhancing it and experimenting on it. So I think that would be a more ideal way of doing it. It's something that would be very ideal to do, I guess would be the right word for that. And then as for side content, I think as far as bringing any other characters, I think definitely, I think having the second playable character as a solo thing, that should be a standard with the franchise, because we've had that in the past. But maybe a third or fourth playable character being an unlockable thing that you do, whether that be a protagonist or an antagonist. Either way would work. I think it just really all depends on how the story was written and how the game was all set up.
Yeah, the reason I said 2 is because one of RE6's problems was that the campaigns were way too bloated in terms of content, and then there was some chapters and characters that the level design wasn't really that great, especially those ski mobile levels with Jake. I just couldn't stand those, to be honest. So if they're gonna put in multiple characters, they should at least make each campaign diverse, fun, and still scary than the last one, because them making just uninspired, bland, and boring levels was the reason for Resident Evil 6 being bad.
So it was Daybreaker that read off number 12, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So I will read off number 13. What are your thoughts on the actual plantation setting and the characters themselves? Oh boy. I think all the characters are as bland as fucking cardboard. The plantation. Okay. So based off of what I've seen, the problem with it is that none of these fucking characters are tied to Umbrella or any other, organization, whether it be Tricell or any new organization that Capcom could have come up with to make the new big bad in the series. That would explain why these fuckers have a fucking crematory in their basement, or why they have these intricate puzzles around their derelict house. It makes no sense. The plantation, it just does not make sense. It just feels like Capcom was like, oh, you know what? This is a Resident Evil game. Start throwing in shit that would make sense in a Resident Evil game, last minute. That's what it kind of feels like to me. The setting itself, though, I don't really care where Capcom sets a new Resident Evil game, as long as it's a good game. It could be set in the middle of buttfuck Louisiana, like 7 is, but if the settings, if the characters are just not good, I'm really not gonna care.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. Is the characters they're all new characters and they're not good. Say what you will about the characters in the original Resident Evil, but they had their own distinct personalities, and you learned a little bit more about them as you went through the game. With these characters, is the main character. The only thing you know about the main character is he's went to look for his girlfriend, and or his wife, whatever. And her family is fucking, or I'm guessing it's her family, is a bunch of fucking crazy hillbillies, and the main character really has not much of a reaction to this. It's like, well, okay, that's even in the original Resident Evil, even with the original PS1 game with the cheesy ass fucking voice acting, dialogue, and all that, like they have more of a reaction to we're in this crazy ass mansion and we're being chased by undead dogs than this dude has to this crazy ass hillbilly family and him getting his fucking hand chopped off. He has like almost no reaction to it. He just has no character at all. He's just almost like a self-insert. Like, he could pretty much just be anybody. Like, he has no presence. The plantation itself is like, it feels almost like a copy. So,
I don't mean to interrupt you really quick. I was just gonna say one thing really quick. Even the Outbreak games, which you play as just random nobodies, and of course you get to learn about the characters as you play along the game and whatnot. But Outbreak did this very well, where you played as completely new characters that were not related to like stars or anything. Some of them were like police officers or security guards, but like for the most part they're just average people, and you're just playing a game about average people trying to survive through the outbreak of Resident Evil. And that was done very well in comparison to something like this, where it's just like, oh, I'm gonna get a phone call or whatever, just like James Sunderland got a letter from his dead wife 3 years after she died. I better go to this place where she tells me I should go to.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I should act very monotone and unimpressed.
Not to mention, speaking of the plantation, like, it feels to me like Capcom is trying to do the same thing they did with the mansion in Resident Evil, where it's just this huge sprawling place, but, it made more sense in the first Resident Evil where they had the intricate puzzles and it's just like all these locked rooms and all that, because of what you learn about the mansion and the connections to it and all that later on at the end of the game. But it doesn't make as much sense with 7, because these are just some random fucking people they just have these fucking puzzles in their house for no real reason, just that they just have them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, the setting is, like I said, I don't really care about the setting either, as long as you make the game good. And it's not good. So, yeah.
I personally, with me, it's like the idea of just like crazy hillbilly deranged, oh, we live out in the middle of this fucking nowhereville. This type of setting has been beaten to hell and back in the movie industry, in the horror movie industry. There's just about they're a dime a dozen in the horror industry. And so it's nothing new, it's nothing fresh. It's just a dead genre. It's like, okay, like I mean, it's really, I would say, to like in today's market, given everything that's already out on it, it would be really hard to be original, but you could add your own flair. Like, oh, cannibal hillbillies that freaking have like some weird infection thing that makes them regenerate. Fucking sounds like a horror movie, like something that's just like for cheap scares and thrills. So definitely, I personally don't care for much of the characters, and I did mention this too, that the main character, he just has absolutely no personality. Like, his reactions are just dull, like that he's like unimpressed by like anything that's going on. I mean, even when he's physically harmed, it doesn't even really feel like he's expressing emotion. And I know a lot of people in the earlier days of like gaming, like, want to like talk about some of the cheesy voice acting and character acting for some of the older games, and I don't think Silent Hill 2 is any exception to this. I think that sometimes it feels a little cheesy at times, but even the original voice actors of Silent Hill 2 conveyed more emotion. Like, it just seems like the emotional range of these voice actors and just the characters in general is just not there. So that to me really hinders it, because it's like you want to actually give a crap about the characters that you're involved with. It's like you actually either, you want to see Ethan triumph and you want to actually care like he does, but it almost sounds like he doesn't care. I mean, hell, within the first couple minutes of the game, you're taking an axe to your freaking wife who's possessed by the freaking demon from The Exorcist, apparently, because it makes her face all scrunch up and her eyes change green. As for the setting itself, I think it could have been done better. I would have loved to see more of like kind of an open-ended sort of environment where it's not just, it's these ancient looking decrepit houses with like, just all this grime and goop and crap all over the damn place. I would have liked to see it maybe be a little bit more than that. And if anything, like maybe the game has different locations. Like maybe it's not all on the plantation. Like maybe only like the first act took place on the plantation. Then you end up in like, different locations via, I don't know, like get knocked out by the freaking weird zombie man that chases you around. And he drives you to some like abandoned like office building or something like that. Like you could expand upon that a lot more and give the players a little bit more to look at and to explore, because just having like the mansion thing's already been done with Resident Evil. It didn't have to be revisited again.
Yeah, I was gonna add on. Sorry, I was gonna unmute, but yeah, like I mean, it's really weird because it's like they chose to go with this setting, and it just kind of seems like they thought more, and it's kind of going back to like talking about like the immersion thing. It feels like they felt more or thought more to focus on like the VR and first person aspect, that they kind of thought that everything else was more of an afterthought. That's what it just kind of feels like to me.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have what was it? Ren just read off.
I'll read off number 14. What are your What are your presumptions of what will happen to Resident Evil 7 post-launch? I'll go ahead and just give my thoughts. I think that it will not sell the way that Capcom wants it to sell. I think a lot of people are like I mentioned reviews. I predicted how the review scores are going to be like. I think that the quote-unquote journalists are going to give it a 9 out of 10 or a high score. And then the actual user score is going to be much, 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 much lower. It'll be a little bit mixed at first, I think. I think at first it'll have a lot of people probably having buyer's remorse and giving it good reviews and good scores. And then later on people will realize, yeah, this game's a piece of shit, and probably give it like a 5 or something. I think eventually Capcom might get maybe close to making the sales or the amount of sales they wanted to make for the game, but it won't be at launch. Definitely not. I don't think so.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree. I think that you'll definitely get a lot of buyer's remorse where people buy it, but they're like, oh, well, I really wanted to like the game, but I can't. But I don't want to tell people that they shouldn't get it. I'm going to have to lie about it. And that fucking sucks when people do that, by the way. But it's kind of expected at this point that people do that because, people are fucking shitters. I think that what's going to happen with this game is that a lot of people are going to forget that this game even exists. I think that, or they'll remember that this game exists, but they're just not going to want to go back to it. And you're going to see a player base that only comes back whenever new DLC comes in, but otherwise afterwards, they're just not going to be willing enough to go back through it more than once. That's what I just think. Like, other than, just to touch on a little bit of DLC portions of the game that the game will get, I just don't think that people will be putting much time into it, because I think we talked about this a little bit earlier too. There are a lot of other games that are coming out in this month and the following few months, and I just don't think that people are going to want to focus on this one particular game. It's just not that good.
And I would definitely say that we had already covered it, and a lot of us have already said it, that I don't think it's going to meet the expectations of the sales numbers that Capcom is hoping it sales. And I could definitely see that this game would probably end up going the way of Yaiba, that it'll be like one of those cheap games that you can get pretty quickly. I mean, within the first couple weeks of Yaiba being out, that game dropped from like a $40 game to a $20 game to a $10 game within like a month to 2 month time span of that game even being released. So I think when word of mouth gets around and people realize Capcom did not deliver on what they were expecting, I see it going that way. It'll be a bargain bin game probably by the end of the year before we know it.
What do you think, Ren? Ren?
I don't have much to say on this. I think the launch isn't going to be that great. I got to go with what Chaos said about buyer's remorse, because a lot of people are getting themselves overhyped for this game, and because of that, I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, fuck, I'm the same guy that bought Watch Dogs 1 on launch. I'm the same guy that bought No Man's Sky. Oh, shit, my $60 can't go back. GameStop's going to fucking fuck me over. So, I think it's going to be like that, where some people, they don't know what's coming. They're going to spend their money. They're not going to like the game that much. And eventually, a lot of critics are going to say, this game was dog shit. Don't buy it. So that's what I'm waiting for. If you're a smart consumer, wait before you buy it. Try the Lantern demo or whatever demo's out now. They updated it like 3 times.
It's the beginning hour. I think it's like Twilight demo now or whatever.
Twilight. Yeah, Twilight.
Might
demo.
as well put in that faggot from Twilight, because that's how fucking boring this game is.
Yeah, I would say, try the faggot demo, Twilight, and maybe you'll have some fun with it, or maybe not. So that's how I feel about it.
Hell, I would even chime in and say, if you can find a rental copy from, like, if you got a store that does rentals, or hell, even like Redbox it for the day, do that.
Family video.
Do that. Just rent the damn thing, give it a go, give it a whirl, and hell, who knows? Within that freaking day that you have it from Redbox or wherever, you could probably end up beating it. So it's like, don't waste $60 on a game. There's a plethora of games coming out within the next couple days that are just going to be far more suited and far more better purchases.
Yeah, Go get Yakuza 0.
Yakuza
That's a far better fucking game.
Play that instead.
Yeah, or get Tales of Berseria, or fucking Neo comes out in February, or get Gravity Rush.
When's Horizon coming out? Is that March?
That's the end of February, so I think it's February 28th.
Yeah, play that.
What game?
Horizon.
Oh, yeah.
Freaking game looks hype as shit. Freaking can't wait.
So, Ren, you want to close off with the final question?
Sure. Let me see here. To close off for this podcast, if the mainline game fails, if this mainline game fails, which is Resident Evil 7, that will be another footnote of a bad game in the RE series. What will be the focal point for Capcom of getting the series back on track with quality control after so many bad side games, and now a bad mainline game in general bleeding into the timeline? So for this in particular, what they need to do is go back to roots, real roots this time. Don't fucking just say, oh, we're going to put this slogan here and say we have survival horror into the mix and now we are getting something back from the fans. I think eventually that's going to turn into a situation where the boy cried wolf, where a lot of people aren't going to listen next time if the game is bad. So they need to put themselves back in a situation where they have the fan base coming back in to them, flocking to them, and knowing that they make good quality products. So I will say they need to focus more on Remake 2, because we were talking about this earlier, but if that game fails, that's going to be a bigger blow, because it's going to be like, you guys shouldn't have remade Resident Evil 2 in the first place if the game is bad. Focus on Remake 2, then take a little bit of a hiatus from Resident Evil, because at this point, there's already so many games in the series, it's like, fuck, take a break. And then come back with better ideas as to how you can scrape Resident Evil 7 under the rug. So that's what I think they should do. They should focus more on Resident Evil 8 later and then work on Remake 2.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, if Remake 2 is successful and if it's actually, good and it stays true to the original as far as, like, the story and possibly even the gameplay is concerned, I think they should really just, maybe go look into the potential of doing a Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. I know that I think the composer for Resident Evil 3 was interested in working on a new Redux soundtrack specifically for a Resident Evil 3 remake. And I would just say, do that. Make those games, make them quality, make them even better, especially Code Veronica. And then, like, possibly stop with the mainline games for now. Maybe just do Revelations only, and after that, just kind of take a really long hiatus from the games. Or from the series. I would say maybe about 10 years. At that point, look into rebooting, because at this point, you really don't know what you're doing with the franchise. And I think a reboot would take away a lot of the stress. Not stress, but it would take away a lot of the strict guidelines that you have to follow with the current franchise, and just at that point you could just do whatever the fuck you want, because I won't care at that point.
And they can wipe the slate clean with a reboot. I mean, after a good amount of time, you could just clear all that out and then start anew. And then
at that point you can do the ridiculous shit that you're doing now, and then at that point I won't question it, because it's part of the reboot franchise, not the original franchise. And I would say at this, because Ren, you were saying focus on something new. I would say, take a break from Resident Evil, and when you do that 10-year break, while you're doing that, look at something like Dino Crisis, perhaps. People really want to see Dino Crisis come back, and I know some people would argue that it would be better suited as a more high-octane action game. I would argue maybe a hybrid of sorts, maybe a little bit more like Resident Evil 4, where there are a little bit of horror elements, but it is mostly an action game. That's just how I personally feel. But as long as it played something like that, I think it would be fine. But anything else, even if it's not Dino Crisis, make a new IP.
I just think, like, what's going to save them at this point is going to be the Resident Evil 2 remake. Like you guys mentioned already, if that flops, then they're going to be in a tough position. I'm hoping that's not the case, because apparently they have the people that were working on the original Resident Evil remake working on Remake 2.
They have, I'm sorry to cut you off, but they have people that were working on the HD remaster for Resident Evil Remake, and then they have people who worked on Resident Evil 0 HD remaster. But some of the team members that worked on Resident Evil 0 worked on the original Resident Evil 0 when it was being worked on for the original GameCube. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure about the remake team. I think there might have been a few people, but for the most part, that was mostly 0 that had some of the original team members.
Yeah, I mean, that at least sounds promising. So, I mean, that has a chance of success. I think they really need to take a look at how well received that is, though, because, they need to look and see, so many people like, them going back to the original games and just redoing that, that is the return to roots that people actually wanted, and I can't see how Capcom can look at that and be like, well, let's make something that's completely derivative of that and is nothing like the original games, basically Resident Evil 7.
And one more time, I'm sorry to cut you off again, but going back, and I completely forgot to mention this, but sales numbers for RE0 and Resident Evil Remake were very good. Resident Evil Remake was one of the games that pulled Capcom out of financial troubles, and RE0 actually sold a little bit better than Remake, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. I just think they either need to focus on doing maybe this remake or possibly more remakes of the old Resident Evil games in the future, or just, doing some new IPs, because there are a lot of people that would like to see them go back to Onimusha or Dino Crisis or something like that. But they have this almost stubborn refusal to even pay that any mind, and they just want to do Street Fighter or Resident Evil. And that they don't realize how many people would like to see them go back to those other IPs and work on that and try to revive some of those. So I think that they just really need to focus on some of their older IPs that aren't quite as well known. Try to bring those back. A lot of people would actually like to see that. That would probably sell pretty well.
And that's kind of where I'm at in regards to Resident Evil as a whole. I really feel that Capcom needs to kind of just slowly wean themselves off of Resident Evil, and put it on hiatus, put it on the back burner. Because I mean, look at what happened with Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. I mean, there are so many Assassin's Creed games on the market. It's so oversaturated, and people just got tired of it. They just got tired of the same kind of style of game, So I can understand in a way that they may have thought going the way that they did with RE7 would sort of ignite more interest, and it wouldn't really hinder things. It would actually kind of maybe bring Resident Evil maybe back to the forefront. But I don't think that that's what RE7 in the end is going to accomplish. So I really feel taking a break from Resident Evil, putting it on the back burner, logging it away, and focusing on either new original IPs or maybe bringing back, like what Chaos was saying, bringing back some of these older IPs, Dino Crisis, Darkstalkers, some, Onimusha. Hell, I mean, even if it wasn't, Kije Inafune working on it, freaking reboot Mega Man, freaking give us a new Mega Man game or something. Give us something to go on instead of these just battered and bruised IPs that they've just constantly been shilling to us. I mean, hell, I would even be the market for, bring freaking Phoenix Wright to like PC or Xbox or freaking PS4, like freaking re-release all the games as like a trilogy or a collection, so it's not just limited to the handhelds. I'd freaking play those, So that's kind of how I feel as a whole on the matter.
All right, so everyone went, right?
Yeah.
All right, so time to do some outros. So you guys can find me on Twitter and on YouTube as biodevil_Dom, and then on Twitch as Dom241996. And I am going on a small hiatus for content, except for I think we have a podcast planned in the near future. But that's all I have really going on. Up next, we have Mr. Renegade. Where can we find you, sir?
I believe he said in the chat his dogs were barking in the background.
Yeah. You can find him as Ren Operative _ on Twitter, and then Renegade Operative on YouTube. Where can we find you, Mr. Chaos?
You can find me at YouTube, on YouTube at Captain Chaos, and you can find me on Twitter by the same name. I mostly do Let's Plays, reviews, stuff like that, so if you're interested, check that out.
Alrighty, and last but not least, where can we find you, Mr. Daybreaker?
You guys can find me on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter at Daybreaker Rain, where I post a lot of game-related content. Currently have a poll going up on my Twitter for my Extra Life campaign of this year. If you guys want to check that out, I really appreciate seeing what kind of games you guys want me to play. So, yeah, that's where you guys can find me.
Alrighty, and I think that pretty much concludes this episodic roast. Capcom, never let this fucking clown, Japanese Ronald McDonald, a.k.a. Masachika Kawada, ever make a Resident Evil game ever again. Please, for the love of fuck, if you actually care about the franchise, just don't.